HOA stole my farm for parking, but forgot I control their power. That's the line they'll never forget. They thought they could walk on my land, turn my farm into their car park, and fine me if I resisted. But what they didn't know is that every light in their neighborhood, every camera, every street lamp, even their clubhouse, all of it ran on my grid. And one night, I decided to pull the switch welcome back to beyond HOA, where the strangest and pettiest battles with neighborhood HOAs come. To life, my name is Daniel. I live on the edge of a quiet suburban town, and I work the same family farm my grandfather built with his hands. A farm that stood long before the HOA ever existed. This is the story of how they tried to steal my land, and how I reminded them that power doesn't always come from rules. Sometimes it comes from the electricity running through their walls. I still remember that night, the night when every single light in the neighborhood went dark and the only sound was silence, heavy, unsettling silence. But before I tell you how I pulled that switch, let me take you back to the beginning, because nothing starts with the ending. It starts with a smile that did not reach the eyes. The HOA president stood. On my farm that day, she wore her usual bright clothes, her clipboard in one hand, her fake smile stretched across her face. But her eyes, they never smiled. She said my land was now designated parking. She said the community needed more space for their cars. And since my farm had unused open land, it was perfect. Her words were sweet, but they tasted bitter. I just stared at her, because how do you even respond when someone tells you your own land is not yours anymore? I had bought this farm years ago to escape noise, to escape people, to escape rules that made no sense. I wanted peace, fields of green dirt under my hands, the sound of my rooster waking me at dawn. But the HOA never liked that. They didn't like the way my grass grew, taller than theirs. They didn't like my old red barn. They didn't like the roosters crow to them. My farm was ugly, uncontrolled, free, and freedom was something they could not stand. First, it was little things, letters in my mailbox telling, and to cut the grass notes taped on my fence saying property must match neighborhood standards. Fines for violating the harmony of the community. Harmony, they called it, but it was control over every inch of life. I ignored them, because I thought, if I stay quiet, they'll get bored. But I was wrong. Silence does not make them leave you alone. Silence makes them hungry for more power. One morning, I walked outside, and my farm didn't look like my farm anymore. There were cars everywhere, SUVs, sedans, trucks, tires sinking into the soil, engines dripping oil onto the grass. The whole board had parked across my field, like it was some kind of public lot. He thought it was a mistake, that maybe they were lost. But then I found the letter pinned to my front door, typed on HO, a letterhead, no signature, no permission asked, just a statement. Your farm is now a designated community parking area. This space will be used for HOA events and overflow. Blocking access may result in fines. I read it once, then again and again, and I felt something inside me. Something sharp, something heavy. They had not just taken my land, they had erased me from it as if my work, my sweat, my family's history didn't matter. At Alley went to the next HOA meeting. I carried the letter in my hand, and when it was my turn to speak, I asked them, why? Why my land? Why without asking? They laughed. The room filled with that smug little sound. The president told me it was for the good of the community, that I had more space than I needed, that I should feel proud to contribute. Proud. That was the word she used, as if I should thank them for stealing from me when I argued. Back, they threatened me with fines. They said I was blocking community access. They called me selfish. They called me uncooperative. And I realized something that day. This wasn't about rules. It was about power, but they didn't. No, is that power was already mine, because their entire world ran through my farm. The streetlights, the clubhouse, the cameras, even their precious HOA office, all of it connected to the old grid line, and that grid ran straight through my... Landy didn't tell them. Not yet. I just let them park. I let them laugh. I let them believe they had won. But deep inside, I was waiting, because every man has a limit and every farm has a boundary. They had crossed mines, so I started watching. I kept track of their events. I counted how many cars came. I noted every loud party, every drink spilled on my soil, every time their headlights cut across my barn at night. And as I watched, my anger grew roots deep, strong, unbreakable. The board thought I was weak because I stayed quiet. They thought I was broken because I didn't fight back. But silence is not always weakness. Sometimes silence is the sound before the storm, and the storm was coming the night it finally happened. They, HOA, filled my field with cars again. Music boomed from their speakers. Children ran across my crops. Adults laughed as if they owned the place, and I walked into my shed, hands steady, heart steady, eyes on the old switch, the switch my grandfather had installed, the switch that controlled everything, and with one pull, darkness fell. Now here's what I want to ask you. If this happened to you, if an HOA stole your land and mocked you for it, would you stay silent? Or would you pull the switch too? The morning after that dark night, I stood on my porch and looked at the land that once gave me peace. The field was scarred with tire tracks. The grass was dead in patches. Oil stains shimmered under the early sun. And it hit me. This farm was not just dirt and crops. It was my history. My grandfather had built it with his bare hands. My father had kept it alive through storms and droughts. And now it was mine. But the HOA treated it like a playground. Like I was a guest. In my own home I had moved here for silence, for freedom, for air that smelled like soil and rain instead of car exhaust. When I first came, I thought this neighborhood would be safe, quiet streets, pretty houses lined up in neat rows, children riding bikes, dogs barking behind picket fences. It looked like a picture in a magazine, but behind those white fences and manicured lawns was a rule book thicker than any Bible. The HOA had rules for everything: lawn height, mailbox size, fence color, even the kind of flowers you could plant in your front yard. And if you broke a rule, you got a letter. If you ignored the letter, you got a fine. And if you didn't pay the fine, they came after you like a pack of wolves at first. They left me alone, maybe because they thought the farm was too far out, too wild, too old to matter. But when they realized my land was the biggest open space left, that's when the claws came out. It started with little things, a warning for unkempt grass. Even though my farm grass was not a lawn, it was feed for livestock. A fine for rooster noise disturbance. Even though the rooster had crowed on this land long before their houses were built, then came the letters, one after another, each one colder than the last, each one reminding me that they wanted control, not order. Control. I kept working my farm anyway. Early mornings on the tractor, long days fixing fences, late nights checking the animals. This land gave me life. But they wanted to drain it. The strangest part was, the same people who sent me fines for grass height would drive their spotless cars into my field without a second thought during HOA meetings. They called my farm an eyesore, but when they needed extra parking, suddenly my land was a valuable community asset. I tried to reason with them. I tried to remind them this was private property, that it had deeds older than their entire HOA, but they only smiled, the kind of smile that says, "We don't care." And every time I walked away from their meetings, I felt smaller, weaker, like they were winning. But deep down, I knew something they didn't. They thought their neighborhood was strong because of their rules, But it was only strong because of my farm's old power line. Decades ago, when the town expanded, the utility company struck a deal with my grandfather. The line for the neighborhood ran through our land, and because of that, we kept certain rights. Rights the HOA never cared to read about rights that gave me the one thing they couldn't control, the electricity that powered their perfect little world. I didn't use it against them. Not at first. I told myself to be patient. I told myself to endure. But patience has a limit, and every day that passed, that limit grew closer. The HOA kept sending threats. They said my crops ruined the neighborhoods. Visual harmony. They said my barn violated aesthetic standards. They even said my scarecrow was a public eyesore. Imagine that. A scarecrow. Too ugly for their perfect suburb. The more they pushed, the more I thought about that switch in my shed, the heavy lever my grandfather once called the backbone of the land. I thought about what would happen if I pulled it one pull, and the clubhouse would go dark one pull, and their cameras would die one pull, and their lights would flicker out like candles in the wind. It was almost too easy, but I waited, because I wanted them to feel safe. I wanted them to believe. They had crushed me, so that when the darkness finally came, they would feel it deeper than ever before. I spent my days watching them. From my porch, I could see the president's house, always neat, always shining, her windows glowing at night like beacons of control. I wondered if she ever thought about me, if she ever lost sleep over the land she stole, or did she just smile in the mirror, proud of how she bent me to her will. Sometimes I asked myself, why fight? Why not just sell the land and move away? But then I remembered my grandfather's words. This land is not just dirt, boy. It's blood. It remembers every hand that worked it, every storm it survived, every life it gave. That was why I stayed, not for me, not even for revenge, but because this farm deserved better than to be a parking lot for arrogant neighbors. Oh, I kept quiet. I let them believe I was beaten. But every time their cars cut across my soil, every time, their parties filled my night with noise, I whispered to myself, one day soon now, let me ask you something. If you had the power to shut down your entire neighborhood with just one switch, would you use it? Or would you let them keep walking over you? The first strike came on a morning that looked peaceful. The kind of morning that tricks you into thinking nothing could go wrong. The air was fresh. The sky was soft and clear. And for a moment, I thought maybe things would finally calm down. But peace never lasts long when the HOA is involved. Stepped out of my house with a cup of coffee in hand, and what I saw made the coffee turn bitter in my mouthcars. Not one or two, but rows of them, SUVs, trucks, shiny little sedans, lined up like soldiers, engines humming, exhaust spilling across my crops. The entire board had parked across my field again, only this time it wasn't just the board. It was their friends, their guests, their whole army of smiling neighbors. The soil groaned under the weight of their tires. Grass that once danced with the wind was now pressed flat, broken, bleeding green into the mud. I stood there frozen. And then I saw it taped to my door again. Another letter. I ripped it off and read it in the morning light. Reminder, your land has been approved as designated parking space for HOA events. Any interference will result in community fines and potential legal action. No greeting, no signature, no shame my jaw tightened so hard it hurt. I wanted to march up to every car and throw their keys into the dirt. I wanted to scream until they finally heard me. But all I did was stand in silence, because anger in that moment wouldn't fix anything. Instead, I watched them, neighbors in their perfect clothes, ward members carrying their clipboards, the president strutting across my soil like a queen. They laughed as if my land had always belonged to them. Children ran between the cars, Adults chatted like they were at a Sunday picnic in my farm. My sanctuary was the stage for their arrogance. I tried speaking to them. I walked up to the president. I asked her to stop, to think, to respect what wasn't hers. She tilted her head, smiled that hollow smile, and said the words I'll never forget. You should feel lucky, Daniel. Not everyone gets to be part of something bigger than themselves. Lucky, that was the word she used, as if theft was generosity, as if destruction was charity. My fists clenched. My heart burned. But still I said nothing, because I had something better than words, something they didn't know about, something waiting in the shadows of my shed. But that day, their arrogance reached higher than ever, as the sun set and their event grew louder. I heard the music blast from their speakers. I saw the flashing lights from their cars turn my farm into a circus. Beer cans rolled into my crops. Children trampled rows I had planted with care, and no one cared. No one thought twice about the land they were ruining, because to them, it wasn't mine anymore. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window, staring at the cars scattered across my field. Their headlights glowed like intruders' eyes in the dark. Their voices carried through the walls of my house, and the more I listened, the more I felt something inside me shift. Patience had died, silence had died, and all that was left was resolve. I got up, walked outside, and felt the soil crunch under my boots. The night was heavy with noise and light, but in the middle of it all, I walked calm, because I knew what no one else knew. Calm, because in that chaos, I had control. I stepped into my shed. The old wooden door creaked like it knew what was about to happen. Inside, the smell of oil and dust filled my lungs. And there it was. The switch, the same switch my grandfather had installed decades ago. Heavy, rusted, solid as stone, the backbone of the land, the one connection between their perfect suburb and my forgotten farm. I ran my fingers across it, and I remembered his voice. This land is power, boy. Never forget it. Outside, the music grew louder. The president's laugh cut through the night like a knife, and I smiled, not the way she smiled. Not fake, but real, because for the first time, I wasn't powerless anymore. I gripped the lever, but I didn't pull it, not yet, because the strike I had in mind wasn't just about turning off lights. It was about teaching them, showing them. But I was not the weak farmer they thought I was. I waited. I let their event go on. I let their joy climb to the highest peak, because the higher they climbed, the harder the fall would be. Hours passed. Engines roared, speakers shook the air, and still, I waited. Every second made my hand itch to pull the switch. But timing is everything, and I wanted the timing to hurt. Finally, when the party was at its loudest, when the field was bursting with people and cars and lights, I smiled once more and whispered to myself, "It's time." But then I stopped, because I realized something. Pulling the switch that night would end the party. It would end the noise, but it wouldn't end the war. The HOA would just blame it on technical issues. They would shrug it off, and tomorrow they would be back. No, the strike had to be bigger, smarter, sharper than just one night of darkness. It had to be something that would stay with them forever. A scar carved deep into their memory. A scar that whispered, "Never touch this land again." So I let them have their night. I let them believe they had won. But inside, I was already planning my strike, and when it came, it would not be quiet. It would not be small. It would be the kind of strike that breaks the ground beneath their feet. Now, let me ask you, if you were standing in that shed, if you had your hand on that switch while they laughed on your land, would you pull it right there and then? Or would you wait for the perfect moment to make them truly pay? The silence of that night didn't last long, because the HOA doesn't know how to stop. They don't know when to quit. They don't know the meaning of enough. 2 mornings later, I woke up to the sound of engines again, but this time, it wasn't just cars, it was trucks, big ones. And when I stepped outside. My farm looked worse than ever. The field was covered tire tracks dug deep into the soil like scars. Beer cans lay crushed in the mud, fast food wrappers blew across the grass, and standing right in the middle of it all was the HOA president clipboard in hand. That same plastic smile on her lips. She waved at me like a neighbor dropping by for sugar. "Daniel," she called out, "we've decided to expand the event space." Event space, that's what she called. My land now, not a farm, not private property, not the blood and sweat of my family, just an event space. She told me they were planning monthly HOA gatherings on my farm, board meetings, barbecues, fundraisers. She even had the nerve to say my farm was finally being put to good use. I could feel the heat rising in my chest. I asked her if she was serious. She didn't answer with words. She answered with action. Behind her, workers began hammering stakes into the ground, putting up cheap plastic signs that read, HOA parking only, community event area. Couldn't believe it. They weren't just using my land. They were marking it, claiming it like some kind of victory flag. I shouted. I told them to stop. But the workers looked past me, like I was invisible, like I wasn't even standing on my own farm. President scribbled something on her clipboard and said calmly, "Any attempt to block this project will result in heavy fines and legal action." Then she walked off as if nothing had happened, as if she hadn't just spit on generations of work and history. That was the moment I knew. This wasn't just arrogance anymore. This was war. The days that followed were worse. Every weekend, my land, filled with cars, neighbors strutted through my fields as if it were a fairground. Children played tag across my crops. The grass, the soil, the farm itself, was being destroyed inch by inch. And then came the fines, letter after letter, slipped under my door, shoved in my mailbox, taped to my fence. Failure to comply with HOA community access regulations, $500 fine. Obstruction of designated parking, $750 fine. Non-participation in HOA event support, $1,000 fine. They fined me for trying to stand on my own land, for daring to say no. It was insane. It was cruel. It was the kind of madness that makes you wonder if you're dreaming. But it was real, and every letter, every fine, was fuel on the fire burning inside me. Started collecting the letters, stacking them in a box, one by one, like trophies of their arrogance, because one day, those trophies would be their undoing at night. I would sit in my shed, the switch glowing under the dim bulb, the hum of power flowing through the wires above me. I would imagine it. The look on their faces, the screams when the lights died, the panic when the music stopped, the silence when their perfect world collapsed into darkness. It gave me strength. It gave me patience, because I knew the time was coming. The more they pushed, the more I pulled back. But pulling back didn't mean surrender. It meant waiting. Waiting for the moment when their greed would make them blind. So blind, they wouldn't see the storm until it was already above them. And that moment came sooner than I thought. One evening, I found a new letter, not taped to my door, not shoved in my fence, but nailed to the barn itself. A large, bold notice stamped with HOAS seal, effective immediately. Daniel's farm is designated as permanent community property under HOA ordinance. Permanent. That word cut deep. It wasn't just a threat anymore. It was a declaration. They were saying my land was theirs. Forever. I ripped the notice off and felt my hands shake, not with fear, but with rage, because in that moment, I realized they were not going to stop, not unless I made them stop. The storm inside me had reached its peak, and the only question left was when. When would I strike? I looked at the switch again. That night I stood in the shed for a long time, my hand hovering over the lever. All it would take was one pull, one sharp motion, and the neighborhood would collapse into darkness. But then I thought, no, not tonight, Not yet, because timing is everything, and if I was going to pull it, I had to make sure it would be a strike they never forgot. I waited even as my land suffered, even as they laughed at me in their meetings, even as their cars ate away at the soul of my farm. I waited, because the storm was ready, and when it broke, it would not leave survivors. Now, I want to ask you, if your neighbors nailed a sign on your barn, claiming your land as theirs, would you fight them with lawyers and letters? Or would you wait in silence, planning the perfect revenge? Secrets are strange things. They live in silence. They wait in shadows, and sometimes they hold more power than the loudest threats. The HOA thought they had me cornered. They thought the letters, the fines, the meetings, the humiliation would break me down, but the truth is, they had already lost, because there was one secret they never knew. One truth they never cared to see. It was buried in history, in my grandfather's deal with the utility company decades before this neighborhood was built, before the HOA even existed, back when this land was nothing but open fields and dirt roads, power lines that lit their streets, that fed their homes, that kept their little world glowing each night. All of them ran through my farm, through old wires, old poles, and the grid that still sat in my shed. And because of that deal, the rights were mine. The control was mine. The HOA president thought she was queen of this community. But what's a queen without electricity to light her castle? What's a board meeting without power for microphones and projectors? What's a neighborhood when every single light goes out? They never asked. They never read the deeds. They never bothered to wonder how the lights stayed on. And that ignorance was my weapon. I kept it quiet. I never told a soul, not even the neighbors who secretly pitied me, because the thing about power, real power, is that it only works when no one sees it coming. Each night, I would stand in the shed, my hand resting on the lever, the sound of the current humming through the walls. It was like the farm itself was whispering to me, telling me to wait, telling me to choose my moment carefully. And while I waited, the HOA grew bolder. They started hosting bigger events on my land, wedding receptions, birthday parties. One time, I even saw them setting up a projector screen for a movie night. Children laughed. Popcorn spilled across my soil. Parents clapped as the screen lit up against the barn wall, my barn wall, and I stood in the shadows, watching my family's history turned into their playground. But instead of anger, I felt calm, because every wire they plugged in, every light they turned on, every speaker they blasted, was a thread tied tighter and tighter to my secret. They thought they were mocking me, but all they were doing was weaving the rope that would hang them one night. I tested it, just for myself. I pulled the lever halfway down, and in the distance, I saw the street lamps flicker. Just a second, just a taste, and then I pushed it back up. The lights steadied. The hum returned, and I smiled in the dark. It worked. All of it worked, and the knowledge filled me with a kind of peace I hadn't felt in months, because no matter what the HOA did, no matter how many fines they shoved in my mailbox, no matter how many cars they parked on my crops, I knew something they didn't, and knowing was enough to make me patient. The president walked around like she owned the world. She told neighbors I was finally cooperating. She bragged about how she had tamed the farmer, but she never once looked at the wires. She never once noticed the poles on the edge of my land. She never once asked where the power really came from. That was her mistake. The kind of mistake you only see when it's too late. One evening, I overheard them planning their biggest event yet, a massive HOA fundraiser. Hundreds of guests, food trucks, live music, decorations strung across my entire field. They were going to turn my farm into a carnival, and they never even bothered to ask me. That's when I knew the time had come. The secret I had held on to for so long, the one thing they had forgotten, was ready to speak. I sharpened the plan in my mind, not wild anger, not blind revenge, but careful, precise. The way my grandfather once told me to fix a broken fence: measure twice, cut once. This wasn't about pulling the switch in rage. This was about waiting for the right moment, the moment when their arrogance would reach its peak, when they would be standing in the middle of their own pride, and then, only then, would I pull. The night of the fundraiser came faster than I expected. I stood on my porch, watching cars roll in by the dozens, engines growling, lights flooding the field, neighbors laughing as if they were walking into a fairground. The HOA president strutted across the grass in her heels, her voice sharp as she barked orders at volunteers. It was her moment, the crown jewel of her reign, and I was about to take it from Harry, walked back to the shed, the sound of music already starting in the distance. The bass thumping, the speakers shaking every beat, powered by my wires. Every cheer carried on my current inside the shed. The switch stood tall, waiting for me, silent but alive. I put my hand on it and closed my eyes. I could almost see it, the chaos that would follow the screams when the lights died, the panic when phones went dark, the silence when the music cut mid-song. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about balance, about reminding them that power doesn't come from fines and rules. It comes from the things they take for granted, the things they ignore, the things they forget, and I was about to remind them the hard way. Now let me ask you this. If you held the secret to your neighborhood's electricity, would you keep it forever as quiet power, or would you reveal it in one dramatic strike that no one could ever forget? The night was alive with noise, laughter, music, engines, voices echoing across my farm, as if it had always belonged to them. Fundraiser was in full swing. Children ran through my fields chasing balloons. Parents stood in lines for food trucks. Neighbors clinked glasses under strings of lights that dangled from my barn to the oak tree. Every single bulb fed by my wires. Every moment of joy, powered by the secret in my shed eye, watched from the shadows. Not a guest, not a host, but a ghost in my own home. And that ghost carried the one truth no one else could see. They thought they had won. The HOA president's voice cut through the crowd, her laughter high and sharp. She waved her hand like she was a queen greeting. Her loyal subjects, the board members, circled her, nodding, smiling, feeding her pride. But pride blinds the eyes, and blind people never see the storm until it's too late. I walked slowly to the shed, each step heavy with years of anger, each step carrying the weight of silence I had kept for so long. The shed door groaned open inside. The switch stood waiting, tall, cold, metal against wood. The hum of electricity filled the air. It was like standing beside a sleeping giant. A giant only I could wake. I put my hand on the lever, and in that moment, time felt still. The music outside kept pounding, the laughter rolled like thunder, but inside it was quiet. Only me and the current, only me and the choice. My grandfather's words came back to me. Power isn't about holding, it's about knowing when to use it. And I knew this. Was the moment I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and pulled the lever, snapped down with a metallic crack. The hum vanished, and in an instant everything outside fell silent. The music stopped mid-beat. The lights died in a wave, plunging the field into darkness. The projector sputtered. The screen went black. The laughter choked into gasps. The fundraiser was dead in the water for a second. No one moved. The only sound was the wind brushing through the trees. Then chaos children screamed in the dark. Parents stumbled, shouting for flashlights. Car alarms blared as confused drivers hit buttons. Neighbors cursed, fumbling for their phones. But phones needed chargers. Chargers fed by the very power I had cut off. HOA president's voice shrieked above the noise. Stay calm. Stay calm. We'll fix this. Her words rattled with panic. Her power was gone. Her authority gone. Because without lights, without music, without control, she was just another voice in the dark. I stood in the shed listening, and I smiled. For the first time in months, the land was quiet, the noise, the abuse, the disrespect gone in a single pull. My farm belonged to silence again, and that silence was beautiful. But then the knocking started heavy. Fists against the shed door. "Daniel, we know you're in there. Turn it back on." Voices piled up, demanding, begging, shouting. Neighbors I had once smiled at now clawed at my door. The HOA president screamed my name like a curse. They finally saw me, not as the weak farmer they mocked, but as the man who held everything in his hands. I didn't answer. I didn't open. I let them shout, because in that moment, I wasn't the ghost anymore. I was the storm. They tried their phones, their flashlights, their generators, but nothing worked. The old deal my grandfather signed had tied everything back here. Every street lamp, every outlet, every wire, it all flowed through me. And without me, they had nothing. I could hear fear rising in their voices, not just frustration, not just anger, but fear, because people only realize how fragile their comfort is when it's ripped away in an instant. I sat down in the shed, leaning against the wall, listening to the chaos outside, and for the first time in a long time, I felt free. I thought about my grandfather, about how he had warned me this land was more than soil. It was history, it was survival, it was power, and now I finally understood what he meant. The night stretched on in darkness. Some neighbors left in frustration. Others huddled with their kids, whispering in the black. The HOA president tried to gather people to calm them, but her voice cracked without the microphone. She was just another person yelling into the void, and me? I just sat there, hand still on the switch, knowing that with one push, I could bring it all back, or with one choice, I could keep them in the dark forever. That was the real power. Not the lights, not the electricity, but the decision, the silence that made them realize just how much they had taken for granted. And as I sat there, hearing their panic grow, I wondered something I had never dared to ask before. If he had the power to control every light, every sound, every comfort, your enemies depended on, would you ever turn it back on? Or would you let them live in the dark until they finally learned their lesson? The night had swallowed everything. No lights, no music, no laughter. Only the dark breathing across my farm, like it had been waiting for years to return. And in that darkness, I was the only one who wasn't afraid. Banging on my shed door had stopped. The screaming had faded, even the HOA president's voice gone. All that was left were whispers carried by the wind, neighbors huddling together, praying for flashlights, praying for warmth, praying for the one thing only I could give, power. I sat there with my hand resting on the switch. It felt heavy, not just metal heavy, but history heavy. Generations of my family had guarded this power, but no one before me had ever been forced to use it like this. I thought about my grandfather. I thought about his warnings. I thought about how he had told me that this farm wasn't just soil and barns. It was a living vein of energy, a current that kept the whole neighborhood alive. And tonight, I had proven him. Right, the more I sat in silence, the clearer it became. This wasn't just revenge. This was balance. This was a reminder that without respect, without gratitude, everything could vanish with the pull of a single lever. Suddenly, the door creaked open. I didn't move. The flashlight beam cut across my face, and there she was, the HOA president. Her perfect dress was muddy, her hair tangled from the night wind, but her eyes still carried that fire, that pride, even in the dark. "Daniel," she whispered, her voice trembling, "you've made your point. Now turn it back on. These are families out there. Children, we can't stay like this." I stared at her. For months she had called me stubborn, selfish, difficult. She had stolen my farm, mocked my silence, used my land like it was her crown, and now she stood in front of me, powerless. "Funny," I said softly. "You never cared about families when their kids were running through my fields like it was a playground. You never cared about me when I asked for respect, but now you want mercy?" Her lips pressed together. She wanted to argue, she wanted to scream, but in the silence, she knew words meant nothing behind her. I could see neighbors waiting, their faces pale in the weak moonlight, some angry, some ashamed, all desperate. And in that moment I felt something shift inside me. Revenge had felt sweet. Yes, but now I had the chance to make them remember this night forever. I stood up slowly, my hand still on the switch, and I looked her dead in the eyes. "I'll turn it back on," I said, her face lit with relief. But I leaned closer, lowering my voice so only she could hear. "You will never forget who controls it. You will never forget whose land you trespassed. You will never forget tonight." She swallowed hard and nodded. For the first time, she wasn't the queen of this neighborhood. She was just another subject, standing in the dark. I pulled the lever back up. The hum returned. The shed vibrated as the current surged, and outside light exploded like dawn, breaking across the field. The music jolted back, engines roared awake, projectors flickered to life. Neighbors gasped as they blinked against the sudden brightness. But it wasn't the same. The laughter didn't return. The cheer was gone. The night had been broken, and they all knew who had broken it. The HOA president tried to gather herself. She clapped her hands, shouted that everything was fine, that the party could continue. But no one believed her. They had seen the truth. They had seen how fragile their comfort was, how quickly it could all vanish, and they had seen who had the power to decide me as I walked out of the shed. People stepped back. Some avoided my eyes. Some whispered. Some glared with anger. But not one of them dared to step in my way. I didn't shout. I didn't smile. I just walked across my land that would never again feel like theirs by the time. I reached my porch. I turned back. The lights glowed, but the party was hollow. The energy had shifted. The HOA president forced a smile, but her voice cracked. The neighbors kept glancing at me, as if waiting for me to pull the lever again. And that was enough. I didn't need revenge anymore. I didn't need applause. All I needed was that look in their eyes. The reminder burned into them forever. That power doesn't come from titles, or boards, or signatures on paper. Power comes from control. And tonight, control belonged to May. Stepped inside my home, closed the door, and let the silence settle again. The storm was over, but the lesson had just begun. Because now, every time they flipped a switch, every time they plugged in a lamp or charged a phone, they'd remember me, and the night I turned their world dark, and deep down, I knew they would never cross me again. Oh, tell me, if you had the chance to humble an entire neighborhood that disrespected Yao, would you give them back the light like I did, or would you have kept them in the dark forever?